before I was diagnosed with cancer, night sweats and nightmares were a symptom. There was something about, like, it was one of my first symptoms. People ask me this all the time, and I guess I'm going to share. This can be the cancer episode where I share a little bit about that journey. Last podcast I talked about the journey being broke up into 3 different parts, like the pre-diagnosis, walking around, kind of feeling into it, the diagnosis / treatment, and now post-treatment. And a lot of people, when I are very interested in what the symptoms were. And I understand that. Like, they want to be on the lookout themselves. They want to know what's truly a threat and what's not. It's not always the easiest to answer because I guess in my mind I feel like, oh, you're caring about yourself when you're asking this question. You don't really care about my journey. You just want to make sure that you're safe. And what can, the older I get, what more can I ask for people than to care about themselves through me? That might be one of the best it gets with the majority of like relationships. Not to be overly pessimistic, and that's not. It's just I realize now that if I have 1 to 3 or 4 people that truly care about me, that can put me, that don't put themselves first all the time in our relationship dynamic, I'm very fortunate. And I am. Like, my parents, they have put me before themselves numerous times. I have a girlfriend who does the same as much as she can. Very fortunate. A brother, mate, and then that's pretty, that's my 4. So I'm fortunate. So people ask about the symptoms that I was feeling before the diagnosis, and one of the most prevalent symptoms was night sweats. Not just like hangover, sweating out the alcohol that you drink like hours before type night sweat. It's more like pools of sweat. And then the chills probably come. It's like wetting your bed kind of night sweats. And it was like every night or every other night. And maybe it's because I was a bedwetter growing up too. Oh no, that's next episode. We'll talk about bedwetting and the significance of that. So yeah, that was one of the symptoms. Nightmares were one of the symptoms. I remember going to a Vipassana retreat to try to heal myself because I knew something was up. I didn't know the diagnosis. I just knew that I had a cough for a while, and the night sweats and the nightmares, and it felt like the right time to go and meditate and try to, heal myself internally. Go to a Vipassana retreat, and the teacher asked me if I'm having nightmares lately, and I said, yeah. How did she know that? And I still don't know how she knew that. And I asked her, I'm like, why did you ask me if I had nightmares? And she said, oh, it's just one of the general questions we ask. I didn't hear her ask anyone else that. But that's neither here nor there. So the symptoms were night sweats. I had a cough for a couple months, literally. Definitely a couple of weeks, a strong cough, but then like a tickle in the back of my throat, coughing a couple times a day over an extended period of time. I lost a significant amount of weight. I was down to like 155, 160, and right now I'm like almost 200 pounds. So I was like 50 pounds lighter than I am now. And, and then, the cherry on top, what really drove me to go get checked out was my lymph nodes, particularly in my neck, were visible, like with the naked eye, like golf balls, baseballs, almost the size my lymph nodes swole up to. Um, and I tell you all this because I have the nightmare, and I wake up with sweat. I wake up with a night sweat, and now I'm triggered. PTSD is triggered. The worry is triggered. Am I getting sick again? I want to stay healthy. When will I learn? Because I have fallen a little bit into some patterns that I've known for a while that they don't serve me that well. And although I don't know why I got sick 100%, I still make reasons for getting sick with various like habits, or I associate or I create correlations without science, just with self-reflection, and that's dangerous. Like the why I got sick, it has been an important question at times, but there's only so far it can take you until you're just spinning your wheels and you need to start moving forward. Like asking why I got sick, it could be literally everything leading up to the point of getting ill. My brain can draw an association to that as being some sort of contributing factor to illness. And there's things that people bring up that make sense. Some people like to help you find out why. That's another big question. Yeah, what caused this? And it's all speculation, and people like to speculate. So, like, a few of my favorite speculations are like pesticides in the water supply, in crops, in foods I eat. A scientific reason is I did have mononucleosis, and white men who have mononucleosis are at an increased risk of having lymphoma. It's not really a why as much as like another contributing factor, and it could be a strong one. The thing with all these contributing factors is now I've met people who've also had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and some of them didn't have mononucleosis. Also, people who have drank and eaten similar diets to me, like we've come from the same place. My brother, for example, father, mother, and many more people, they don't get sick, And then people say it's all disease arrives in the mind. I hang out with enough metaphysical hippies. I say that in the most loving way possible. And that can only bring you so far. Because I was meditating. I was doing these plant medicines, hallucinogens that, it made me feel like I was getting my mental health under control. I was working out all the time, doing the yoga, doing the breathing exercises, fasting. I do have to say, before I was expressing my anger a lot more, leading up to the diagnosis. I don't know if I knew I was sick, and that stressor, just made me more irritable, or if the irritation and the expression of anger fed into the illness. It's the ye old chicken or the egg. And yeah, so that's pre-cancer symptoms. I eventually go 9 months kind of walking around, and then the fatigue. I didn't mention the fatigue. The fatigue was real. I'd walk upstairs and be quite winded. And I remember just always, I remember thinking like, damn, turning 30 definitely feels different than being 20, like significantly different. And I thought I was just trying to like swing up into like a physical prime, but I'm like, dang, smoking weed for 10 years has been really difficult, like on my body. And yet I still partake. But after last night, I'm like, fuck. Like it really shook me. Last night really shook me. And again, and maybe it's good to be reshook. Maybe I'll remember some of the lessons that I was learning during the cancer times and the suffering times. But like I had a couple errands to run this morning. I had to drop off keys somewhere. And I drive there only to realize I don't have the keys. Get back in my car, drive back home to get the keys, only to realize that they were in my hoodie pocket. Drive back, drop the keys off. Return home, I left the doors open. So I just want to give you guys a little bit of taste of what you're dealing with in today's episode, and I guess what I'm going through. Yeah, it's a real shaking of reality to consider. Well, I don't want to consider it anymore because ultimately last night I got to a point where I was so worried and afraid, you know. Sat down, meditated, sat down, did deep breathing. This is at like 4 or 5 in the morning. And then there's just a point where it's like, oh, okay, I can't be afraid anymore. You know, time to move forward. Went into the fear a bit and felt into it for as long as I was willing to until I had enough. And then, you know, now we're moving forward. And there's a lot of gratitude having the opportunity to even share this, even though I don't feel like 100% mentally. Being able to share this and then post it. And there's like something romantic about it being around even if I don't make it. Might be a tough podcast to listen to. And maybe we'll swing it back around. Or maybe people are just into the a more emo. It is Halloween season. So this podcast has been a little spooky. So that's pre-treatment. During treatment, you know, I'm going to keep that short because there's really only so much you can say. Like, chemo is chemo. It's uncomfortable, but it worked for me. So the main discomfort with chemo for me was the stomach and the nausea. And some days were manageable. So I'd get chemo on Tuesday, and then I would wait 2 weeks and then get chemo again on Tuesday. So chemo on Tuesday, and I would feel uncomfortable for about a week, maybe sometimes a week and a half. Like later in the treatments, weeks 8, it would almost compound and it would take me a little bit longer to recover. But I would feel kind of intense nausea for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, and then it would kind of taper off 6 days, 7 days, and then I would feel like back to normal, and then I would have chemo the next day. So you're just kind of always at half mass. You're always just at like a lower power, physical power. And I don't understand how some people, if I had to show up to a job every day, 9 to 5, there would just had to have been some days I'd have to call off. I yeah, there's just some days I don't understand how someone with a family and a job, like to make the worst situation, like I picture like a single mother like going, or a single father going through this and having to take care of their kids and having to, work at a job that they don't necessarily love. It seems like some days that would have been impossible. And having this conversation with my dad, we actually were starting a nonprofit organization called Forward 24/7, where there are a bunch of costs that aren't factored into healthcare, that goes into chemo treatment. There's the transportation costs aren't covered. Daycare costs, for example, wouldn't be covered. Food, of course, isn't covered. Parking. Some hospitals, you have to pay $20, $30 in parking per hour maybe. And treatment, it can be 6 to 8 hours. Now that sometimes that's reimbursed, but sometimes it's not. And the fact that sometimes it's not, it's on the list. And every cost, matters. You're putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars, without insurance, you're putting in tens of thousands of dollars to be well again. And now also you have to have all your same bills, and you have to support your family. It just doesn't seem possible for someone who isn't as fortunate as I have been. So this is our nonprofit that we're starting to cover all the costs, or a portion of the costs associated with cancer treatment that aren't factored into health insurance. He's doing some structuring with the legals, and there will be an application process and then a stipend process, and we'll need support, but that's not right now. We're still getting the legals all situated, so we can move forward. Forward 24/7. That's the name he decided on. I like it, and it makes sense for this, because there is only so much reflection you can do before you just have to kind of move forward. So that's during treatment. And an interesting thing during treatment for me, was that in that like super suffering place, because there was some times where all I can do was feel the discomfort in my body. It was so overwhelming, the discomfort, that it's like all my attention was there. But having that hyper focus, having that hyper selfishness of only being able to focus on myself and how I felt, for some reason, it freed up the others around me. It gave me more patience. It gave me more kindness, and more sensitive to other people's, and more empathetic, more sensitive to my impact on them, potential suffering that they were facing, and not wanting to exacerbate that. So in this like deep selfish place, there was a selflessness associated with it. Like this paradoxical like existence. And I have this thesis that the paradox is ultimately true. If you take anything or any concept to its utmost, it becomes its opposite. That'll need examples. Like loyalty, a virtue. if you take loyalty to its furthest, then you might be disloyal to yourself. You might be disloyal to your heart or your beliefs. You may be doing things that you don't ultimately believe in and betraying yourself, or betraying the other even. It's like there's a lot of examples, and maybe you guys can think of some and put some in the comments, but this is like a thesis I walk around with. And it's not, it's not too far-fetched. It's basically the yin and yang are like, they make one thing. So it's just kind of saying that again. And so during treatment, there was like a gentleness. There was definitely a humility, maybe, that was actually a positive. And I remember at times there were some days that I would say cancer is the best thing that happened to me during treatment. And I'd write things down because I'd want to remember the lessons that I was learning, like in real time, of being in this kind of like dark place. And so that was kind of like a during treatment thing. And now I'm post treatment, and post treatment has, because when you're in the treatment, you're actively fighting, you're actively combating the disease, and there's a little bit of relief in that. It's like you're taking the steps necessary, or I felt like I was taking the steps necessary to be healthy. And that was like enough to give myself permission to kind of be a little bit more. Gave myself permission to just kind of relax and be patient with myself. But now that treatment's over and I'm not taking those explicit steps of treatment, now am I doing enough has like crept back in. Am I doing the right things to stay healthy? So it's kind of like the mind game the plot has thickened in my mind. And it's a special kind of hell, all of these different phases of the cancer treatment, were like, can be viewed as a hell. I did talk about how there was like a light or a heaven, I guess, at the center of the hellscapes. And I guess the silver lining or the heaven in the post-treatment is this anxiety of, am I doing everything that I can to be healthy? It helps me share this podcast. It helps me share like unabashed, like not ashamed. So a little bit more bravery, a little bit more urgency, and at times a bit more appreciation for being healthy, because I can contrast it to being like unable, not disabled, but like, man, I don't know, during chemo, like pretty much disabled. Like some days, like my capacity wasn't like tested, like besides me testing myself, like even during chemo, I'd make sure I'd go for a hike like every day. And I didn't know if I was going to make it out. I didn't know if I was healthy or clear. So gratitude every day, but I'd still like rake leaves and jump on the trampoline and even try to lift weights. And, but to be off of treatment and like my body has returned, my power has come back in a way. Speed, a little agility. Like I feel more athletic when I'm training jiu-jitsu and stronger. And maybe I've gotten less humble and less gentle like I was during. Maybe I've forgotten a little bit of the lessons with the sense of external power returning to me. But here we are remembering. So that's kind of the cancer journey. That's what's coming through today. Um, yeah, my personal journey. And I'm sure it's way different for some people. There's lots of different chemotherapies out there. The chemotherapy I did was specific to Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it's called ABDV for those who are in the know. And it was 4 chemotherapies put into my body. Actually, I was given a port. I didn't. You know what? There was 3 surgeries along the way, and those were also bad. I'd say don't get surgery if you don't need it. Like, my collarbone's still out of place from an injury I had before all this, and it'll stay that way. It's not limiting. It's not limiting my function. I can still be athletic and play sports, and just going under the knife is a real thing. Like, getting cut open is a thing, and the first surgery I had, I'm like, I didn't want to go under. I didn't want anesthesia. So they gave me, I'm like, I want local anesthetic. And they're like, are you sure? I was like, yeah. And it was a biopsy this was to make sure that they got the diagnosis correct. It was like, they already knew something was up. They already thought through my blood work and through my symptoms that it was Hodgkin's lymphoma, but they needed to take a piece of a lymph node and see exactly what type it was. So the first surgery, no anesthetic. Highly regret that. They put me on a table, and this particular surgeon covered my face. So I had plastic bags and linings on my face. Not bags, plastic linings, and then surgical cloth on my face. And this was just exposed, just my neck. They gave me a shot in the neck, and then, if you've had Novocaine, similar to that, it was lidocaine. And then they cut open your neck, you feel it, and then you hear the metal and the sound of the scissors, and you know that it's cutting your body. And your neck, and my neck is so vulnerable. Ugh. So you hear that. That's one thing. You feel the metal, you feel the pressure, and then they cauterized the wound. They burned me up, and I straight up felt that. And they cauterized the wound. I was like, ouch, ouch. Please stop, please stop. And then the apathetic, I'm sorry, the surgeon felt like a robot. There was nothing warm or kind. I think he was translucent white with white blonde hair and eyebrows and gray eyes. That's how I remember him. And I'd be like, and he'd be like, I'm sorry. 2 seconds later, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No Country for Old Men, Javier Bardem. Just cold killer. That's how this surgeon felt. So I finally get the wound cauterized, and this is I'm fragile as heck. I'm pretty sure I have cancer. No one's told me exactly that I had it at this point, but you know. I knew at that point. And I remember he cauterizes the wound. All the bad feelings seem to stop. He takes the wrapping off my face pretty much. And I think he's like, how are you doing? And it's so embarrassing, but I was just so vulnerable, such a little child. I was like, this is just the beginning, isn't it? That's what I said. So dramatic. A tear in my eye. This is just the beginning, isn't it? And he said, you'll be fine. And then he leaves. And then I cry for like, long enough. Oh, so that's surgery number one. Surgery number two, they had to put a port in my chest. And I don't know if y'all can see some wounds there. So the port basically, instead of giving the chemotherapy through your arm where there's more risks involved, they put like a port under your skin and they run a tube into your heart, pretty much into aorta. No, I don't know. One of the veins or arteries that goes to the heart, so that they can put the treatment directly into your bloodstream and it can be dispersed through the body. There's less chance of leaking, apparently. So that one, I got put on like, I think tramadol and the one that's famous that really messes with people, Oxycontin. And I kind of get why people, go in on that stuff. It's a very effective medicine for surgery, for example, for if you need to get cut open. And I remember that surgery. So you don't go full under. It's kind of like a twilight, I think they call it. And I was laying on the table. They have to make a cut here, feed the tube and do all the things, place the port. And he gives me some and I can feel it and I feel pretty chill. And I don't feel pain. It just feels like a good, like no worries, cozy blanket feeling. And then he starts talking to me. He's like, how you doing? And I remember being very like with it. I'm like, I'm doing fine, even though he's cutting me open at the time. And he's like, okay, give him 3 more units of tramadol or codone. So they give me more and I'm like, yo, feels pretty good, but I don't feel like, I still don't go under. Like I wanted to stay with it. I wanted to like feel into what that experience felt like, what that drug feels like. And so I stayed present and like kept my eyes open. They didn't cover my face this time, so I learned that they didn't have to completely like suffocate me like the first surgeon did. And it was a really similar area that they were working on. And he asked me again, how you doing? And I answered again, I'm doing pretty good. Something casual like that. And he gives me more of the sauce. And I never fully went out. I just kind of always felt pretty relaxed and good and not super high at all. It felt pretty clean, but I kind of also understood why people would want to chase this feeling a little bit. It's, really strong anti-anxiety, acceptance, needing nothing more, than just the feeling of comfort. It's just like the grand chase of comfort, pretty much into one experience, into those surgical medicines, and that's probably as far as they should be taken. So that's surgery number 2. They put a port in, go through the full cycles of chemo, and then the third surgery was taking the port out, and that was just, I get to the hospital. This is full COVID swing now, so I'm of course by myself. And the surgeon comes in and he's like, starting to explain to me what a port is. And he's like, yeah, this is why we put a port in. Do you want to see it? And I'm like, well, I've had one in my chest for 6 months. I'm not really interested in seeing it. And he's like, oh, this is a port removal? I thought we were putting a port in. And I was like, yeah, it's a port removal. He's like, oh, this should be a piece of cake. Okay. So they put me on the surgery table. Again, local anesthetic, just lidocaine. because I didn't want to keep chasing the dragon, you know. I asked not to be put fully under. Um, and because this one was a little easier. It was one incision, and they just kind of like pull it out. So he's cutting me. He's doing the cutting thing. I'm on the surgery board, and he starts talking to me about Stranger Things, and it didn't seem like he was doing this to alleviate. I didn't want him to talk to me. Look, you have a job. You're cutting me open. I don't care about the TV shows you're watching. Maybe I care if you got good sleep last night. Like me, I don't think I should do surgery today based on my nightmares last night and leaving the door open and forgetting and remembering the keys and all the signs of, like, I probably shouldn't. Today wouldn't be a good surgery performing day. So maybe I care about how you slept. Maybe I care about, are you hydrated? But I don't want you to make small talk with me while you're cutting me open, especially, and I can't capture the condescending and like the tone of it all. And I'm sure there's a lot of comedy in there if I can figure out how to like structure the experience. But I do remember, there was a surgical nurse there, and he's like, yeah, Stranger Things is pretty weird, right? And I didn't think he was talking to me. Like, why would he be talking to me? But then again, why would he be talking about a TV show while he's performing surgery on me? So I look at the nurse, and she goes, like she's tripping out too, because this guy, it just doesn't make any sense. And then he starts talking about my previous surgery, and he's like, why would the surgeon do the stitch work upside down? And I didn't know at the time, but the surgeon before him did the stitch upside down because it leaves a nice flat scar. It leaves a nice flat surface. How he sutured me up, there's like a bulbous, like bumpy scar, and it itches like every day. So wouldn't recommend him. I don't remember their name, but this is the Halloween episode. This is definitely the Halloween episode.